I'm going to jump into today's webinar, Insuring Your Art Collection, 10 Essentials Every Collector Should Know, hosted by Artwork Archive. We're so happy to have you all here today. So hi, everyone. I am Elysian Kogelmeyer. I am head of partnerships here at Artwork Archive, and I lead our collection management free educational resources, including these webinars. And it's such a joy to be working with experts like Adrienne from Huntington T Block. So Adrienne Reid, this is not her first webinar with us. We've had her on past webinars about insurance. And it's so good. We ask her to come back year after year. And so she brings over 20 years of experience as a specialized fine art insurance broker for museums, universities, municipalities, art dealers, private, corporate art collectors, traveling exhibitions, and art shippers, you name it. And so she is very experienced in reviewing loan agreements, providing risk management recommendations, and negotiating fine art insurance placements. So hence why we have her here today. She is a manager of a multi-office team of fine art brokers for Huntington T Block. And so we are thrilled to have you, Adrienne. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much for having me back. I love working with you guys. Really appreciate it.
Um, and for those that are new to Artwork Archive, or you got our email and you don't know how you got our email, perhaps you're on our newsletter. Artwork Archive, we are an online art collection management system. We work with artists, collectors, and collecting institutions from all over the world. We've been around for a while now providing these cloud-based services. We are going to get into the importance of inventory when it comes to ensuring your art collection. So at the end, we'll share a little bit about how Artwork Archive can help, but also know that we provide these free educational resources, monthly webinars. Our webinars are recorded and hosted on our website. We write articles, we have a newsletter. So there's a lot of great ways to keep learning and growing your collection and protecting it with us. And so I'm glad to have you all here, whether it's your first webinar or your fifth. So with that, I'm going to mute myself so Adrienne can get into the content that you are here for today. So take it away, Adrienne. Thank you.
Thank you so much again. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Adrienne Reid from Huntington Block. I'm actually based in Houston, Texas. Our headquarters is in Washington, D.C., and we have offices in New York City as well. We've been in the space of fine art insurance for over 60 years and have the great privilege of insuring some of the greatest collections across the United States, including at museums and personal collections, state institutions, state collections, and then also conservators and artists as well. In addition to musical instruments, we insure symphonies across the United States. So really excited to be here to talk to you specifically about collectors insurance. So today we're going to dive into some best practices for art collections, talk about insurance considerations as you're building your collection, and then talk about some best practices in terms of protecting the art, what happens when there is a damage, if unfortunately you are in that situation, talk about throughout some just top tips that I have, and then we'll wrap it up with how Artwork Archive can help. So let's get into it. So our first tip is really about starting your collection with intention. So this is at the very beginning of what I would call the life cycle of a collection. It can come from either just you're very interested in art. It could come from an inheritance, perhaps, or it could come from a goal of investing. There are many different goals that collectors have when they start building their art collections, but the most important thing is As I always like to say, start as you mean to go on. And that means starting with solid documentation. And Artwork Archive is perfect for that because it's a complete repository for all of your documentation, including provenance, invoices, condition reports, appraisals. All of this will become so important, not only when you get to the point of needing to get insurance, but also if there is a claim or just in the general span of your insuring lifetime, understanding what limits are appropriate and how to best tailor the coverage to meet your collection goals. Then, so what I'd like to dive in next is about, what are the differences between a separate fine art policy and your homeowner's policy? This is one of the most common questions that we get, especially from new collectors who perhaps started with just insuring their collection on their homeowner's policy. And that is a perfectly fine way to insure your collection if you're just starting out and if the values are pretty low. But do know that the coverage is not as broad as a separate fine art policy. And what does that mean? It means that you have an actual separate insurance policy that is tailored and bespoke to artwork insurance. It is not treated as ordinary content. It's not treated like your tables and chairs. It is actually insured as artwork, and we'll get into what's special about that. Another way you can sort of pull art out of your contents, personal contents insurance and your homeowner's policy is what's called a rider. And some homeowners insurance policies offer this. It allows you to add on via an endorsement specialized coverage for your art collection, and usually that comes in the way of scheduling art specifically. So, what are the benefits of fine art insurance as a separate policy? It is broader coverage. So we are working on a all risk policy form, which means that everything is covered if it's not specifically excluded. And we'll talk about the exclusions in a minute. But its aim and goal is to be incredibly broad coverage for your artwork. More importantly, perhaps, is the customized valuation clause. And we'll talk about that later as well. But art is not something that, like your car that perhaps might depreciate over time. It has its own unique valuation method. And so your insurance policy should recognize that and should address that as you're financially protecting your collection. Of course, if there is a claim, you're dealing with specialized loss adjusters. And for Huntington Block, we work with a whole pool of specialists throughout the country. All they do is fine art claims. And so they understand the nuances of the policy coverage. They have the connections with conservators, restorers, art handlers, art shippers, to be able to be your advocate and your representative of making sure that the claim is handled appropriately. And one of a key benefit that people don't often think about is that if they have a separate fine art insurance policy separate from their homeowners, that means that you have two different loss histories. So you could have a claim on your house, for example, if you had a water leak, but it didn't damage your artwork. That would be a claim under your homeowner's policy and would impact the premium on that policy. But if it didn't impact the art policy, then the art policy still has a clean record, which is incredibly important when you are looking to, have the most valuable coverage at the most competitive rate. So it's a really great tool to help with keeping your premiums as low as possible. Talked about how the coverage is all risk. And so it's important to understand when you are looking at your policy and perhaps, take a look at your homeowner's policy, crack it open. I know it's a lot of fun to open up your homeowner's insurance policy, but go to the exclusions and read them, understand them, ask your broker about them. What does this mean? For fine art insurance, there are very, very few exclusions. So these are the most common exclusions and really should be, the minimum that's on your policy. So wear and tear and gradual deterioration inherent vice. These are all things that you will see on almost all insurance policies because it really gets to the fact that insurance is designed to cover sudden and accidental losses. It's not designed to cover gradual things that happen over the course of the lifetime of an object. Damage due to repairing, restoration, and retouching. This is intentional damage that the repair or restorer is doing to the work, and perhaps they do a bad job. Hopefully, you're working with restorers and repairers that are knowledgeable and expert in their field and understand that whatever they do to an object, they should be able to undo to the object. But that is essentially, an intentional damage exclusion. And I always compare it to, if the conservator, while working on the piece, accidentally trips and falls into the piece, then that would be considered a handling damage, which is totally different from this exclusion. So it's an accidental damage versus intentional. The next two exclusions are war and nuclear. Pretty self-explanatory and catastrophic in nature. Most insurance excludes these causes of loss. Of course, there may be more exclusions on your policy, so please talk to your broker about it. But on our policy form, Huntington Block's policy form, which is the broadest fine art insurance policy in the industry, these are our exclusions. And so that means that everything else, every other cause of loss could be covered under the policy. So handling damage, transit damage, kids breaking things, housekeepers tripping and falling on things, having wild parties and people accidentally spilling wine or breaking something. Those are all considered part of the policy coverage. Next slide. So the second tip, essential element that you should consider with your fine art collection is how you're managing all of your documentation. I spoke about that a little bit earlier, but again, this is so critical when it comes to insurance because you have to have documentation in order to really even get started with insuring your collection. When you go to us and ask HTB or any other provider for a quote, they'll ask for a completed application and then they'll ask for documentation or an inventory of your collection, which would include all of these things. And that is so that underwriters who are the insurance company can properly determine what the exposure and the risk of your collection is. And so I always say that you can start with a simple spreadsheet. That's great. That's a great place to start. But of course, you can do a whole lot better. And Artwork Archive can talk about that later on in the presentation. But it is absolutely critical that you have some documentation. Key things to know on that are making sure that it's backed up or stored off-site. We've had several unfortunate losses of fire, losses, for example, with the California wildfires, where the documentation about the collection was stored in the residence. And of course, it was also damaged. And so that makes the claim process that much more difficult. So always, have an ability to access your records during a claim or during a natural disaster, but then also making sure that, it's not stored and won't be damaged as well. There's some redundancy there. Next slide. Common pitfalls for claims is, like I mentioned with the fire loss, no documentation. That makes it really difficult for the claim. The insurance company has to have some proof that you owned the work. So you have to provide something. Unknown condition, that's also tricky. If you've had a piece for a very long time and you don't know when a loss happened and you can't pinpoint it, it can also make the claim a little bit more difficult. And the other pitfall that I've seen actually firsthand recently with a client was that, they didn't update their policy appropriately and they weren't talking to their agent. And of course, we make it a practice at Huntington Block to always check in, say, has anything changed? What's going on? Have you gotten anything new? But if you don't tell us, we don't know. So it's important to have that smooth communication channel with your broker and just tell them everything. They don't, if it's better to tell them more than to tell them less. So those are some common pitfalls that we can often see in claims. So the third tip that I always stress and recommend is using art services for transportation and installation. Over 60% of fine art losses are caused by transit damage and handling damage. And that can even just be something so simple as, using the wrong installation hardware and artwork literally just falling off the wall. That happens more often than you think. Another thing would be just not being mindful or thoughtful about where you're installing works within your residence, away from windows or perhaps away from low traffic areas, and just thinking about the movement within your house and properly hanging works so that they're not at exposure danger. But a big key for that is using a specialist. And so an art handler will be very knowledgeable on the proper weight load of the installation hardware that's needed. They can talk to you about glazing, and they're able to secure artworks very well within a specific space. When it comes to shipping, I mean, that's even more important. FedEx and UPS are, great for what they do. I love Amazon just as much as everybody else and get my things the next day. But that is not at all how you want your art shipped. They are literally throwing things on trucks and shooting it off of conveyor belts, rerouting it. It is getting really aggressively handled. If you do happen to use those, I just would strongly recommend that you pack it in such a way, essentially to withstand like a 3-story drop. If you just literally took your package and just threw it off the building, would it survive? Would the artwork still be there? It's a very extreme example, but it's actually accurate because that's how aggressive and extreme the vibrations and the handling are for these shipments. So an art shipper is someone who specializes in art transport. They have a climate controlled vehicle. It is alarmed. They have 2 drivers. It is never left unattended. They have smooth ride, air ride suspension on their trucks. They have minimum requirements that they adhere to make sure that your artwork is safely handled in transit. And another common question that we get about insurance in transit, people reach out to us all the time and say, well, I just bought something and I don't have art insurance, but I just need it covered in transit from New York to wherever, LA. We can't do that. We have to, and any fine art insurance company can't do that. They only will write a annualized policy or like an exhibition policy, which would be short term. They're not going to be able to offer you a one-time, trip transit coverage that you can get through the shipper. And again, if it's an art shipper, they should have fine art insurance that they can offer to you for an additional cost. But know that if they're going to offer it to you, they have to condition report the piece and pack it to make sure that they have a baseline of the pre-existing condition of the piece. And then again, at the end, when they're dropping it off, that they are condition reporting it when it's unpacked. So just some tips on that. And so the next essential tip that we have is art tracking and agreements. It's important to understand, especially if you have multiple residents or you have offsite storage, to know how much of your art collection is at any location at any given time. The reason why this is important is because you can, depending on the aggregation of value that you have at any one location, you can adjust your insurance policy that makes sense for that. In other words, let's say you have a residence in Florida, but you also have a house in Aspen. Well, one cause of loss likely would not impact both locations at the same time. And so you could talk to your broker about putting a limit on your art policy that represents the highest probable loss, at one location, which would then save you money because you're not having to insure the entire collection essentially, for a catastrophic loss to both locations that probably won't happen. I say that, but you never know. Talk to your broker about that. Knowledge is key when it comes to knowing how to insure your collection. Another element of this is just agreements. And so this goes to knowing where your things are and then knowing who's responsible for insuring it. So this would include anytime you're lending to a museum, you're sending something out to consignment, perhaps you're sending it to an auction house for sale. You must have documentation that is an agreement stating that they are responsible for insuring, or you're responsible for insuring, whatever that agreement is. And that agreement is critical when it comes to a claim, because the insurance company will look to that documentation to establish insurance responsibility. I mentioned condition reports earlier, and again, this is so important when you are insuring something and then you change it to some other party insuring it. At that point in time, you should have a condition report, because that's when there's been a changeover of insurance responsibility, and you can understand, each party can understand, okay, this was the condition that I started insuring it at. Which helps with claims if there's any sort of dispute about, when a loss happened. Great. And so I can't reiterate enough about the importance of loan agreements, and this applies to consignment agreements as well. It establishes insurable interest, meaning that the party that's insuring it has a responsibility to insure it. It should have an insurance period. A lot of times you'll see this term wall to wall in loan agreements, and that essentially means from the moment it's removed from your premises all the way until it's returned back to you, that it is the museum's responsibility for insuring. That may not be the case on a specific loan, but most of the time it is. And then of course, valuation, so important. When you sign a loan agreement, there is a space, and if you are having the museum insure it, that you are to put a value, and that value, you need to put a value there, because the museum, on their insurance policy, when it comes to them insuring it, that will be the value that will be used for the purpose of insurance. It's called agreed value. And so if you leave it blank, that introduces a whole lot of gray area and potentials for dispute if there's a claim. So you must have a valuation, but know that you can update it if needed, just through an addendum with the museum. Any loan agreement that you see really should have a limitation of liability clause, which essentially means that recovery is limited for the museum by what's payable by the insurance company or indemnity, so that there's perfect congruence between the museum's insurance and its liability to collectors. Why is this important? It's important because the museum, just like a collector, has their own insurance policy, and their exclusions are very similar to a collector policy as well. But those are exclusions on their policy, meaning that they don't have coverage for those causes of loss. So if there is a damage due to nuclear, for example, they're not going to have insurance coverage. And so as a collector, if you don't have some sort of limitation of liability clause on the contract, it could hold the museum responsible for paying that out of pocket. And of course, museums, work on tight budgets. And so they need to have every assurance that what they are promising to cover to the collector and for their artwork, they actually have insured on their policy. So really straightforward. You should look for this clause anytime you have an agreement with the museum. Next slide. So the fifth tip is about protecting against risk. We are all very aware, of the catastrophic and unfortunate losses in California with the wildfires. And then, last year there was a lot of hurricane activity. Knock on wood, we've been pretty okay this year, but we still have another month to go in hurricane season. So please be aware of that. But honestly, losses come more commonly in severe storms. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but these are just pop-up storms that cause significant flood damage and tornadoes and hail. It's not like you see them coming a mile away. They tend to pop up. So have a disaster plan. And that really means having laid out some steps of preventative measures. What are you going to be doing to prepare for this event? So are you going to be, taking all of your furniture that's sitting outside, bringing it inside? Are you going to be lifting everything off the floor? Are you going to put things into a strong closet at the core? Are you going to move things? Are you going to put things into your car and evacuate, right? What's your plan? Have a plan before, during, and after the event. And what's really important about this is having relationships with experts. This can include your broker, having their number so that you can reach out to them immediately to notify them if there's been any damage. With an art storage facility or an art shipper, oftentimes they will have the ability to establish a proactive contract with collectors to say you will get priority access when a disaster hits. And a really low-tech, easy thing to do about to prepare is to just do a walkthrough with your phone, walk around your house, and just take a very thorough video of your artwork, your furniture, even your clothes, how many shoes you have. This will save you so much headache and will be such a good source of information if there is a catastrophic loss. Because I remember one time I was my luggage got lost in transit at the airport. Lost it. I don't know how that happens, but it does. And so I had to write down everything that was in that luggage, and it was actually very difficult to think about, well, what outfits did I bring? Which shoes did I bring, even though I didn't wear them? So having that video is just a really easy tip to think about. In the case that you are preparing for a catastrophe event. And so again, document access is really important. If there is a disaster or you're not allowed to come back into the evacuation area, do you have access to your documentation? Where is it? Hopefully it's somewhere offsite in the cloud and you're able to, pull it down without having to wait to get back to your location. So just some tips about the importance of emergency preparedness and disaster planning. This is some statistics that look at, in the United States alone, the billion-dollar disaster events, which is inflation adjusted for decades of experience, and anybody can tell that the trend is not great. We are seeing fires quadrupling in size, tripling in frequency. And like I mentioned about these severe storms, that's the area in the middle that's green. They are increasing and they're costing more, much, much more. So please invest in loss prevention and emergency preparedness. If you had to spend money on buying insurance or being prepared for a disaster, I would say be prepared for the disaster. I'd much rather you not have a loss and be able to see your art again than have it insured and then you're given a check and you have to replace it. Just my personal opinion on that. But the trend is not great, and even if you're not in, California or Florida, for example, there are still so many things that are happening across the United States, specifically related to severe flooding and then severe storms. All right, so enough about climate risks. When the unfortunate thing happens and there is a loss, understand the claims process. So the first thing, of course, is to move art out of harm's way to the best ability that you can, of course, safely. Life safety is of critical importance, of course. But if you're able to mitigate some damage, please do that. Notify your insurance company once you're in a safe space. And this applies even in accidental damages as well. It's always better to report to your insurance company, even if you think, well, maybe I won't actually put in a claim for this. It's not very much. Just report it. Just let them know. You can always withdraw a claim at any time, and that just avoids the possibility of late reporting, which is not good. Collect all your documents. So get your photographs together, get your transit documents, your bill of lading from the shipper, if that's appropriate, condition reports, appraisal documents. All of these documents are things that the loss adjuster is going to ask you when a claim comes in. They're going to ask for photos if it is damaged, and sometimes they may require to do an inspection or come and see the work itself. If it's applicable, if it's a partial loss damage, it will then go to restoration. And, conservators around the country, there's a wide network of specialists and experts in different fields that the insurance company will tap into to get the best possible restoration for your artwork. And then once that's done, an assessment will be completed to determine, okay, how was the restoration? Did it completely restore the piece? Or is there still some residual loss in value that would be paid under the policy? So that's sort of the basic elements of the claim process. And, as we look to the next slide, we can see some of the ways that a claim could be handled. It could either be a partial loss or a total loss. A total loss, which I'll hit first, is essentially the work is completely destroyed, and the insurance company will pay, if it is a covered cause of loss, the full insured value for the piece. And then the artwork is then surrendered to the insurance company as salvage. And if it turns out that, the insurance company, of course, they're not in the business of having salvage or wanting salvage. So, if you want to buy it back from them, you can. It's a negotiation that happens after loss. And so, that's just something that you would work with the adjuster on. If it's a partial loss, the policy coverage should cover the cost of repair and restoration plus any resulting depreciation and value. But remember that this never exceeds the full value of the piece. So let's say you have a $5,000 pottery object and it gets slightly damaged, and the repair is necessary for it to get back to how it was before the loss, but the repair is going to cost $10,000. Well, the insurance company will never pay more than what the full insured value of the piece is. So they will write a check for $5,000. Now, what you do with that object afterwards, that's up to you, but know that a partial loss will never exceed the full insured value of the piece. If you have something that is a part of a pair or a set, for example, a triptych or a diptych, the policy should address valuation from the perspective of the whole of the parent set. So those are how losses are adjusted. The majority of losses are partial losses. So we're talking about repair, restoration, and potentially depreciation and value. So when we talk about value, this is, again, probably one of the most important elements of a fine art collector's policy. On our policy forms, HTB, we have proprietary policy forms that all of the insurance companies that we work with accept and adhere to because it's the broadest in the industry. And so we offer two policy types. We offer blanket coverage and we offer scheduled coverage. Scheduled coverage is something you might be more familiar with on a homeowner's insurance rider. So items are itemized on the policy itself, and the value in the event of a claim is the agreed value, which is listed in the policy itself. You are insured for those items in particular, and just those items. There is a newly acquired item clause, but you have to pay really good attention to making sure that everything on your collection has been itemized and that the values are continually updated. There's a lot of admin that goes into that. So actually 80% of the 1,000 collectors that we insure choose a blanket policy. This policy provides a blanket limit that applies broadly across your entire collection. There is no schedule attached to the policy itself. If there is a claim, the valuation is current market value. So that means that at the time of loss, the insurance company, through the adjuster, will ask you for documentation. Have you had an updated appraisal recently? Do you have an invoice? And that will be the starting point to determine what the current market value of the piece is. If needed, they will engage with a third-party appraiser who will look at comparables to determine market value at that time. But the benefit of the blanket policy is that you can choose a limit that you're most comfortable with for the entire collection. And like I mentioned about the different locations. So again, going back to that collector in Florida who has a house in Aspen, let's say they have 5 million in Florida and they have 20 million in Aspen. Then what they probably would do is purchase a blanket policy limit that is 20 million that would apply to both locations. And so it gives you that broad coverage that you need for the entire collection. Some things to watch out for. None of these are on our policy form, but they are on other companies' policy forms, and that is a per item cap. So they'll say something to the effect of, we'll pay you scheduled value, but only up to 150%, up to 150% of that scheduled value. So meaning they'll give you a little bit of wiggle room above the scheduled value, but they're going to cap it at a certain amount. So that's something to watch for. Another one that's really bad is auto inflation. A lot of times insurance companies that are not specialists in this space will just automatically inflate scheduled values every year, like by 3% or 6%, just regardless of what is actually happening in the art market. And that can be really dangerous because, you know, your artwork doesn't inflate by that smooth graphic. That would be great. Maybe perhaps that would be great. But, you know, that's not actually accurate. So, you know, watch out for that. Another requirement perhaps is that they say, well, you have to get updated appraisals every, you know, X period of time, or they identify certain objects that say, okay, you have to get an updated appraisal. You know, things to talk to your broker about, but just be mindful of these clauses that can appear in other policies. Great. Claim tips. I can't really stress it enough, but documentation is really important. It's so key when it comes to insurance. You know, insurance is a product that you hope you never have to use, unfortunately, but if you do end up using it, having the right documentation will make it so much better. And then also just understand that conservation takes time. You know, it's not like taking your car to the shop. It can take months, and sometimes we've seen cases of conservation that takes years, depending on the complexity of the loss. So we want to use the best conservators, and of course have it be repaired in a timely fashion, but you know, we want to make sure that it's being handled in the most appropriate and best way, and sometimes that just takes longer. And then always the goal is just to get the art back to you. It's not to just write a check, it's to get the art back to you so that you can continue to enjoy it. So just, you know, some tips that I'd like to throw out there to keep in mind. All right, enough about claims. I talked a lot about valuation, and so it's important to talk about where those values come from. And so we always recommend, if you can, an updated appraisal every 3 to 5 years. It's not a hard and fast rule. It very much depends on your collection, the genre of art that you have, and many other factors that are involved. But understand that when you go to get an appraisal, first of all, make sure that you are going to a certified appraiser. This is somebody who is certified within one of the 4 different appraiser associations throughout the United States. Some are better than others, and there is no, licensing, sort of thing that goes on with this. So you have to be very careful when it comes to selecting an appraiser to make sure they're qualified and that they adhere to, the proper standards of valuation. Because what would be terrible is you end up spending money on an appraisal and then the insurance company or the IRS, for that matter, doesn't accept the appraisal because the appraiser is not qualified. Update on a regular basis. If you have a relationship with an appraiser, it makes it a lot easier to ask them to give you updated values. And keep in mind that even though galleries do have a sense of what the pulse of, art market values are, they are not appraisers. Some may also have an appraiser hat because they've gone through courses and have gotten certified, and that's fine. But they have a vested interest, and they don't have a completely unbiased interest when they are providing you with an appraisal report. So we'll see sometimes that galleries will provide updated values, and you just have to take that with a grain of salt. Same goes with the auction houses. They do, Christie Sotheby's, all of them do auction appraisals. But keep in mind, again, that they are also have an interest, in perhaps getting you to sell your collection. The 2 most common appraisal methods are fair market value and current market value. Fair market value is what you'll find with IRS, estate planning, anything having to do with tax deductions and donations. This is a lower appraisal method, so the valuation tends to be lower. The other is retail replacement or current market value, and this is what's used for insurance purposes. It's higher because it assumes that you're going to take your time to find a comparable. You're not in a forced situation of selling or purchasing artwork, that you want to really take your time looking to see what comparables are. So 2 different valuation methods, very different. The key is to make sure that, whichever method you use, you're communicating that and properly understanding it for the purposes of insurance. Great.
And then Adrienne, just as a heads up, we're at 44 past.
Great. Thank you. We're almost there. Number 8. When it's time to sell, just some tips from my experience, been working with collectors for 20 years. Make sure you understand the different channels of selling art: galleries, private dealers, auction houses, and online sales platforms. Not every channel is the best channel for you to sell your art. So it varies and depends. Read agreements carefully. And this goes back to the documentation tip, making sure that you have an agreement, a consignment agreement, and that if appropriate, the gallery insure it while it's in their control. You can always keep the object on your policy until it's sold, and still have them insure it just in case there's any complications. And then 3rd would be using professionals. Again, using professional art handlers and shippers. The worst thing that can happen is you're ready to sell it and you ship it to the auction house and it breaks because it was sent FedEx. That's very frustrating. So make sure that you're using professionals. You can always make sure that your insurance stays in force until the transfer is complete. Great. All right, so moving on to ownership strategies. This kind of goes towards the tail end of the collector life cycle, but it's something to consider as you're building your collection. And again, circling back to this idea of, what are your goals with your collection? If it is for, handing it down, legacy, through trust or, through your estate, talk to your attorney about that and make sure that you are positioning yourself in your collection and your heirs and having that conversation with them, making sure they want your art first of all, to make sure that it is in the right vehicle to avoid tax implications, etc. Donations are a common strategy that collectors will use to reduce their tax. And so, museums are constantly working with donors to work through the paperwork on that. But just some common strategies that we see when it comes to the life cycle of an art collection. Great. The last tip is really just having an expert team. I think, and hopefully I've underscored enough to everyone the importance of having specialists. So working with an insurance broker who is specialized in this space. Huntington Block, of course, is the biggest and the best in the business, so we would recommend you contacting us. But also having a lawyer who's knowledgeable about art collections. If you're building a trust, for example, that can be a really great tool to use for your heirs. Having an art advisor if you need help with knowing what pieces to acquire or where to acquire them. They're great assets. And then having an appraiser and of course an art handler and storage facility that's specialized in this space. All of us should have the goal of protecting the legacy of the artwork itself, right? Like its cultural heritage, its patrimony, and then also its value, its financial value. Art is not just an investment, it is, beauty in and of itself. And so we want to protect that. And you do want to make sure that you are regularly updating your team to make sure that your insurance company is aligned, your legal documents are aligned, and your collection documents are aligned. So I think with that, I will turn it back to you. So thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, Adrienne, that was amazing. I was saying before this was the live webinar, Adrienne sent over her slides, and even though this is, I think, our third presentation, I always learn something from you. A lot, actually. I learn a lot, and hopefully that's the case for those attending. And it's funny you mentioned about with disaster locations that it's not just, California or areas of wildfire or hurricanes in Florida. The reason why Artwork Archive exists for collectors is actually because one of our co-founders, there was a flood in his basement here in Denver. He did not have the documentation at the ready, and so he got into a long, laborious battle with his insurance claim. And so for him, he was like, collectors need an art database, not just artists, which is what we started out as. And so with all those great tips that you were giving about documentation, the importance of, and there's some great chatter in the chat too about what to keep track of. That is what I am going to cover in just a few minutes here about how you can use a cloud-based database, like Adrienne mentioned, something that's accessible offsite. Because that's a great point. Your home may be okay, but you may not be able to access it because it is in an emergency zone. And so, or you may be traveling and you need to update your insurance rider or whatever it may be. You want to be able to send over information. So the biggie, to echo what Adrienne has been sharing, is that for insurance, it's not just enough to list the artwork, that you need proof of existence, value. So Adrienne mentioned appraisals in her slides. We also have a webinar recording just about appraisals with an appraiser. So if you're interested in learning more. And then echoing the best practices that she shared about inventory documentation, record details, noting the location, and then so you can quickly send out this information. As Adrienne mentioned, your insurance agent will probably need multiple pieces of information, and you can easily just send it from one place with one click if you're using a cloud-based system like Artwork Archive. This has a lot of words on it. And so this slide lists as a checklist. So Adrienne did a great job outlining in an earlier slide that you want to have your artwork details, you want documentation, values. This is just if you like a little bit more detail, I will be sending the slides out after this presentation. Feel free to use this as a checklist. And so the types of documents that you would want to store. So the certificates of authenticity that proves the authenticity of the work, donation and gift agreements, loan agreements, as Adrienne mentioned. Make sure you're keeping track of your insurance specific information. So your the contact information for HTV, whatever you may have. So this is just like a nice little checklist. And what's helpful, and this is just a little video recording of Artwork Archive, uh, as an example of how you can store all of that information in one place on one object record. And so the values, if you enter appraisals and attach the documents, you can automatically update the values. So those are up to date. You'll always have access to your high-res images, which is really helpful. So if you are using Artwork Archive, awesome. Make sure to enter that information. Keep it up to date, as Adrienne mentioned. And then one key piece is that I wanted to share is that it's not just about, as Adrienne mentioned, storing the information, recording it. It's being able to use it, to be active, and to do something with it. So it's not just like living in a manila folder in a desk. It is in a cloud-based database so that you can send this information out quickly. So here is a screenshot of an inventory report that you can create from Artwork Archive for insurance. What's great is if you are logging those insurance values, then the system will total it based on what works you are including. You can filter by your location, so you can run a report just for your Aspen house, or you can run a report for all of the works within the collection, all of your recent appraisals. You can run a report for everything you're bequeathing to your daughter, whatever it may be. And then just to close, Adrienne and I were chatting about, she was just at Untitled in Art Fair in Houston and got a lot of great questions from collectors. So I wanted to address these, and we hear it a lot too at Artwork Archive since we work with collectors from all over the world. So when we talk about a cloud-based database, there's always questions about cybersecurity. And so when you are looking at a collection management system, whether it's Artwork Archive or another one, you want to make sure that it has strong security and backups. So here at Artwork Archive, we are a cloud-based system. It's what we do. So we need to protect your data. And we have enterprise clients from all over the world, banks, hospitals, etc., collectors that need the security. So know that it is of the utmost secured. We do backups, we encrypt to make sure that your data is safe. The second question being a lot of questions recently about ownership of data when using a database. Know that with Artwork Archive, we are just a repository. You are just storing your information with us. We have no rights, no copyright to your artworks. It's your artwork. You're just storing the information with us and then deciding what you want to share out with those professionals that Adrienne mentioned. And then Adrienne also mentioned, for planning later on in your life, what happens after you're gone? If you are using a database, does it just float away? It is one of the great things is that it is transferable. So whether it be your attorney, your estate planner, the head of the trust, whomever is your benefactor, whomever is executing your will, can have access to it so that your wishes and your legacy continue to live on, and all of that information that you have populated continues, including the values, the provenance, and all of the information about the artworks. Then again, these slides are being shared after the webinar. see, why aren't you advancing to the next slide? Here's another slide with a lot on it. These are all hyperlinks. They are hyperlinked to articles that we have written over the years on these topics to help you be more informed with appraisals, insuring your collection. There's some great webinar recordings of Adrienne if you'd like to see her face again. And then here at the end, some helpful resources from Artwork Archive. If you want to try out Artwork Archive for a database, we have a free trial. We have a newsletter so you can be informed with all of the great articles and webinars that come out. So hopefully I didn't talk too fast because I wanted to make sure we had time for questions. I did see, Adrienne, you had a question in the chat from two folks about, I don't know if you saw it, but
The
can one,
appraisal associations.
oh no, there was one
Oh,
before.
okay.
Thank
Because
you for
I corrected
answering that.
that.
Thank you. Can one buy a blanket insurance package without a detailed evaluation first? The use
Oh,
case
yeah.
being the obstacle for this person and another is that this person has 4,000 photographs in his collection, and the other person who echoed this question said their issue is more quantity versus a few high value items.
It's a really common question we get. It's such a difficult position to be in because you have to have an inventory or documentation to get the process started. And so what you may do is perhaps start with a scheduled policy or a scheduled writer and just add it as you go on. Like as you work towards inventorying it and completing your records, add them to the insurance policy. At a certain point, an insurance company will be comfortable with giving you a blanket coverage without a full documentation, but really, they're looking for a full inventory if they're going to be providing any blanket type of coverage.
That's really helpful. And then another question that came in through the Q&A. Is it possible for an artist with few sales to establish the value of their artwork for insurance purposes?
With that, we do insure lots of artists, and we have a special policy for them. It is completely different than a collector policy because it insures both their artwork and that is either in progress or completed. If it's commissioned or not commissioned, it's insuring their artwork themselves. And so for that, it's a blanket coverage, and the valuation is based off of sales history, et cetera. So please feel free to reach out to us about that. We could help for sure.
And then a follow-up question. This person has a full inventory of the work, but not a current appraisal. So will insurance companies be able to write a bulk policy in that case? It's a good
I'll
question.
give you the lawyer answer. It depends. But I would just reach out to, your broker and say, here's what I've got, what can we do? It does depend on values. Oftentimes insurance companies will accept just a full inventory, but may require appraisals for objects that are valued over 50,000 or 100,000, something like that. So my best recommendation would be to just talk to your broker and see what they can offer.
That's great. That's helpful. And then a few logistics that have come through with the questions. Someone asked how they can contact you to refer clients. So if you could just put your email in the chat. I also included Adrienne's email in the slide. So in that intro slide, you have her email as well. And then someone asked about that appraisal webinar. So it is listed in the link of resources. You will see webinar recording, appraisals, and inventory management. Thanks, Adrienne. And I'm actually hosting another appraisals webinar with the Winston Artery Group in the new year in January. So if you are signed up for our newsletter, you will receive that invite. And we have a link for signing up for our newsletter. I see a question about learning more about Artwork Archive for recording their collection. Feel free to contact me. My email is here, Elysian@Artwork Archive. Happy to walk through the platform in a little bit more detail. And then one last note I saw asking if Artwork Archive has an app. Good news, since we're accessible, we're cloud-based, we're accessible anywhere as long as there's Wi-Fi and internet. So our clients don't need an app. And what's great is then you're not restricted by an app because everything that gets released, updates, fixes every day are released to your artwork archive account. So you don't have to, upgrade to the newest app platform. Uh, this talk will be made available. It is recorded. It will be sent out along with the slides after the presentation. So, looks like some great connections are being made in the chat. Again, this was recorded. I will send the recording and the slides so you guys all have access to Adrienne's incredible tips. My video was off, but I was just nodding the whole time. Adrienne, you're a wonder. Thank you so much for being so clear and thorough and setting all of these collectors and art professionals up for success with their collections. We very much greatly appreciate you.
Well, we appreciate you. Thank you for all the resources that you guys provide. Y'all are amazing, and looking forward to the next webinar.
Yay! All right, everyone, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be in touch.